Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some romance book recommendations with the book boys being saved by the girl trope. So this is one of my favorite tropes. Well, it happens to be, I love like every trope that I make a video about. I'm so easy with tropes. Like I fall for everything. I'm such a sucker for romance, but happens to be when book boys are saved by the girl, I fall extra hard just because I love seeing the vulnerability in the guy. Like usually when you're reading a book, it's like the girl is being saved by the guy because something is wrong with her. And then the guy comes in and he saves her. Like that's a very classic thing that always happens in a book. But when the guy is being saved by the girl, like the girl comes into this guy's life and then all of a sudden, he changes because of her. I love seeing that. So today I have a ton of recommendations to share with you where this kind of happens. And I don't think anything that I'm particularly going to say is very spoilery, but some people are very sensitive with that. So beware going into this video, but I really don't think that there's too much spoiler stuff that can pop out of my mouth today. But the other night I did just finish reading the Takeover by T.L. Swan. And this was kind of the reason why I was like, it's finally time to make this video, because this one, it was such a perfect example of when the book boy is being saved by the girl. So this is the second book in the Miles High Companion series. And in this whole series, you're following a bunch of brothers. Their last name is Miles, and they each get a book. And in this book, you're following Tristan, and they all are part of this very large company. They're all very, very wealthy, that whole type of vibe. And happens to be in their company, that they all own together, his job is that he takes over companies. So he goes to failing companies and then he basically buys them out and takes them over. And in this book, the book starts out where he's basically trying to take over Claire's late husband's company. Her husband had died, left her the company, and she now has three sons that she's a single mom type of vibe, and she's trying to save the company so that the boys can inherit it one day, and she's unfortunately failing at this. So Tristan comes in, tries to save her, and she is very insulted. She's like, no, I'm not selling you this company. I don't like what you do. And then a couple of months later, they basically meet again at this conference, and then he ends up really pursuing her, and then she has a much harder time saying no to him. And then throughout this book, you basically get to see their relationship develop. He's eventually going to go and meet the kids, and then they're going to have ups and downs throughout this whole book. And it was a really, really good time. And the thing is that it so surprised me. I had thought that this entire book was going to be him trying to take over her company, and instead it was him basically taking over their lives, him basically forcing himself into their lives and just changing them. And it was so good. And the whole thing of how this ties into the book boy being saved by the girl is, well, first of all, happens to be on page 386. It specifically said that you and the boys are saving me, not the other way around. And that's why it hit me in my head of oh yeah, this is a book where the boy is being saved by the girl, because the whole thing with this book was that he likes to take over things. He likes to find a problem and then fix it. And that is why he was very much attracted to a lot of his past girlfriends, because there was always something wrong with him. And happens to be this girl, Claire, she's a single mom, and her boys are having a lot of issues because, they're dealing with the loss of the husband / the father. And there was a lot of stuff that, was problematic with them. And he basically comes in and he fixes them. And then at one point it was oh, but is this all that I care about with them? And at the end of the day, it was no, I don't care just to fix you. I care because I love you. And you actually saved me because I was in this pattern of always just trying to help people over and over again. And now you finally helped me come out of that and basically fall in love with someone that I want to spend the rest of my life with. And I'm just saying, chills all over my body. This book was so good and I highly recommend it. Okay, I just spent way too long on that first book, so let's continue. Next up, I have Forbidden by Carla Sorensen, which is the fourth book in a companion series, but it is the first one that I read from this series. So I totally think it's fine to not read them in order, because this was the first one that I read and I was totally cool with it. But basically, this is an age gap single dad romance, and you're following this retired MMA fighter. His wife had died from cancer I think 2 years ago, and he's having a very hard time moving on. So So he decides to like pick up his and his daughter's life and just move back home to be closer to his family. And when he gets there, he basically purchases this gym, and happens to be the girl in this book is the manager at the gym, and she had a massive crush on him when she was growing up. Like when he was a pro MMA fighter, like she followed his career like to death. She was like very, very obsessed with him. And the second that like she realizes that this is the guy that is going to be her new boss, she like freaks out and has a very hard time like being around him and stuff like that. So they end up having like a very like, slow burn, tension filled romance sort of thing. And it was a really good time. I think it was like a 10-year age gap too. And that was like an extra aspect of like, boss to a manager, and then like, age gap. There was a lot that was making it forbidden. And I really enjoyed the book. And the thing is that this was one of those books where it's like, you can't help when you're going to fall in love with someone. And the thing is that he lost his wife only 2 years ago, and he definitely wasn't ready to move on. And then this girl comes like crashing into his life, and he just, it's like he wasn't ready for her. And he basically like, it was one of those books where the boy was saved by the girl, because like she came into his life and just like brought him back to life. And it was the sweetest story ever. I highly recommend this one. Next, I have Waking Olivia by Elizabeth O'Rourke, which I feel like I've talked about recently on my channel, but like I have a really hard time like not talking about a lot of books that I like often on my channel. So this was definitely one of the ones that like, is going to stick in my brain for a while, and I'm very excited to reread one day. And the thing is at first glance, you very much think that this is a book where the girl is being saved by the guy, because this is like a sports romance that has a lot of trigger warnings that I definitely recommend looking up. And it's kind of like this girl, she's dealing with a lot of stuff from her past, and she gets a lot of nightmares, and that makes her run in her sleep. So she might run like 10 miles in her sleep, and she doesn't even realize that she's doing that. And she happens to be like a track star. Like she's on she wasn't like a D1 college for track ready to go to the Olympics, but because of her running in her sleep issue, she can never actually perform when it's time to perform in a race or anything like that, because she's already winded. So she ended up getting moved to a different college, and she's now at like a D3 college, and she ends up getting this new coach, and the coach really doesn't like her because he thinks that like, she just has a lot of baggage and he doesn't want to deal with it. And then he slowly realizes that something is actually wrong with her. So he ends up like getting very much involved in her life and helping her with this sleeping issue that she's having. And it is very much a girl was saved by the guy. But then at the end of the book, it literally said, like, let me just go to the last page, because the last thing that was said in this book is that, hold on one second, I gotta get there. But it literally was like the guy was having a conversation with his mother, and she was basically like, you did save her, Will, and she saved you. And then he says in his head, I guess she's right, and one day I'll tell Olivia exactly that, but right now it's time to go to the finish line and watch my girl win a race. And the whole thing was that like, the whole book was like, oh, he was saving her, but then you slowly realize that like he was dealing with a lot also, and she actually saved him as well. And I'm not going to go into it because you should just read the book to find out, but just trust me on this, that like they both saved each other in this one. Next, I have Drive Me Wild by Melanie Harlow, which is the first book in, I think it's called the Bellamy Creek series, but I could be wrong about that. But either way, this is like a very cute small town romance, and happens to be, it's kind of the same situation as Waking Olivia, of like, at first glance, you think that it's like the girl is saving the guy, but really it's like they kind of both saved each other. And in this book, like this girl she's about to start a new life. Like she was very wealthy, and her family is like losing all of their money. So she decides to like go away and just like start fresh in a tiny town. And while she's driving there, she makes a pit stop and she ends up crashing. And this guy hears her crash, runs out and tries to help her. And happens to be, he's a mechanic. So he basically offers to like tow her car for her. The thing is, it's very late at night. So he ends up like offering her a place to stay. And then he offers her a job so that she could pay for the car, because she's kind of like out of money. And she ends up like sticking around for a little bit while he's like fixing up her car. And then they end up obviously like, having a relationship. The thing is that he's dealing with a lot too. Like, he kind of is having like a failing business, like, and also like relationship wise, like in his personal life, like, stuff is going on there as well. And she basically came crashing into his life. And then not only did he save her, but she saved him in so many ways. And it was so adorable. Like, do I have to go into it? I don't think so. Like, you should just read the book book to find out. So I highly recommend this one if you're into like very cute small town romances. Like it was like a tiny bit cliche and like very classic what you would expect from a small town romance. Like a lot of like, meddling neighbors and everybody in the town knowing of everything that's going on in everybody's life, and like, the mother getting involved in their relationship, and like, the old man next door, like everything along the lines of like what you expect from like a very cute small town romance was in this book, but it wasn't too corny. Like I very much like this book, so I recommend it if it sounds up your alley. Next, I have one of my favorite series of all time, which is the Addicted / Calloway Sisters series by Kristen Beck-Ritchie. So I talk about this book all the time on my channel, and I'm not gonna like really get into it too much of what it's about. I'll just have a video linked down below in case you are interested in reading it and you don't know what this series is about. But this is such a perfect example of when the book boy was saved by the girl. So in book 1, you're following Lily and Lo, and Lily is a sex addict and Lo is an alcoholic, and they are both currently fake dating each other so that they can live in their addictions without their families, like, getting involved in their life. And then throughout all of these books in this series, you get to meet more characters, you get to see more relationships develop, but you also get to see Lily and Lo grow with each other and overcome their addictions together by being with each other. And yes, this is one where like they kind of saved each other, but oh my God, there are so many quotes in this book where Lo just tells Lily, like, you saved me, like, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And this is just such a good example of when the book boy was saved by the girl. I can't even get into it. I just take my word for it. Oh my God, this was a good one. And happens to be in this universe, another couple that is like a book boy being saved by the girl is Garrison and Willow in the Whatever It Takes duet. So you do originally get to see this couple like in the later books in the Addicted Calloway world, but they eventually do get their own duet, and that is Whatever It Takes and then Wherever You Are, which is the second book. And happens to be, this is another amazing example of where the book boy was saved by the girl because he was dealing with so much. Like I definitely recommend looking up trigger warnings for these books because there are a lot that these people are dealing with. And happens to be like this boy, he was being abused by his family and he was so down. Like he had so many problems in his life, and then Willow basically comes in and just changes him for the better. And it was one of the sweetest stories I ever read. So, Lily and Lo and then Garrison and Willow, both book boys being saved by the girl. So freaking good. Next, I have Wrecked by Lauren Asher, which is the third book in the Dirty Air Companion series. So in this series, you're following a bunch of different Formula One race car drivers as they each get their own romance. And in book 3, you are following Jax, who happens to be like the party boy of the group. And he's kind of like an adrenaline junkie. He's an alcoholic. He's addicted to pills. And the reason for it is that he's actually dealing with a lot of stuff in his personal life. And that's just the way that he's been coping. But because of that, he's kind of getting a bad rep in the media. So for this season of driving, his company that he races for basically hires this PR rep for him named Elena, and she's basically tasked with fixing his image and kind of like getting a hold on him. So she kind of has to be by his side the entire season, and they're they have to share a room together and she has to be with him all the time. So it's kind of like a forced proximity workplace environment sort of thing. And happens to be in this book that not only is Jax dealing with a lot of stuff in his personal life that Elena is going to help him get over and deal with and everything like that, but Elena's actually dealing with a lot too. And I recommend looking up some trigger warnings for this book, but happens to be while they do both save each other, this one is much heavier on the boy being saved by the girl because I wanted to give Jax a hug the entire time I was reading this. And the way that we get to see him grow and overcome everything that he's dealing with and like open up to Elena and like lean on her and everything like that, it was really, really sweet. Next, I have Only When It's Us by Chloe Liesa, which is, I feel like there are so many books and like companion series in this video, but like whatever. Anyway, this is the first book in, I think the Bergman Brothers series. Yeah, it is the Bergman Brothers series. So anyway, in this book, you are following this girl who is on the soccer team in her college, and she's not doing so well in one of her classes. So she asks the professor for like some notes, some extra help, and he's like, oh, go and get the help from the guy sitting next to you. So she tries to get the guys like next to her attention attention, and he kind of like really avoids her. So they very much don't start off on good terms. And she later finds out that he actually wasn't avoiding her and ignoring her, but he actually just didn't hear her because he is deaf later in life. So they end up getting like set up for like a class project in this class. So they end up having to work together. So it's kind of like a frenemy sort of thing. Like they didn't get along right off the bat, and then they're forced to work together, and then they kind of become friends. And obviously a relationship is going to bloom between the two of them, like slowly but surely. And happens to be because this guy is deaf later in life, he is dealing with a lot, and like he's not used to it. He only communicates through like texting. I think he knows a little bit of sign language, and he could talk, but he chooses not to because he's dealing with a lot because of that. And throughout this book, you kind of get to see like this girl coming into his life, and then all of a sudden he kind of wants to like get better for her. So he slowly starts like putting earplugs and like testing it out secretly, and he tries to start talking for her and stuff along those lines. And it's kind of just really cute to see like him kind of like growing out of his shell that he's been put in because of this girl. And it was definitely one of those like book boys being saved by the girl, because like, I don't know, it was just so sweet to see him slowly like getting over a lot of like the traumatic stuff that he's been dealing with once this girl comes into his life, and he just kind of wants to get like better for him. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a very sweet romance, and I recommend it. Next up, I have Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover, which I feel like I never talk about on my channel, but it fits so well into this video. So I'm very happy that I finally have a reason to share this book with you guys. But basically in this book, this guy, something happened to him a long time ago, which I feel like I can't say because it's just going to spoil the book. But basically he's dealing with a lot, and he never really has relationships with anybody. Like I don't even remember, like, does he have one night stands? I don't think so. I think he has like the thing that happened to him in the past, like he just doesn't want to get close to any woman, and happens to be his best friend lives across the hall from him. Like they live in a building, and his best friend's little sister moves in for a while, and then she ends up like getting under his skin, and they end up having this like benefits sort of relationship. Like they're not even really friends, but they end up having like a friends with benefits thing. And then she ends up basically saving him from like the traumatic thing that happens. Like she basically like puts him back together and like makes him whole again. And I really don't think I can say anything else without spoiling anything. So like whatever, this was a book boy being saved by the girl, like very, very much so. And that's all I'm going to give you. Next, I have Voyer by Fiona Cole, which is an age gap teacher-student forbidden romance. So you're following this girl that needs money for tuition for her college. So she ends up getting this job at this sex club where people can basically like come in and watch her anonymously. Like they basically like request for her to do something, and then she like will either accept it or not, and then she does it, but she doesn't know who requested it from her. And like, they look at her behind like a one-way mirror, all that sort of stuff. It's kind of like a voyeur situation. That's what voyeur is, when people watch someone doing a sexual like act in secret or something along those lines. But either way, this guy is basically, part of this club, and he kind of like starts to get like really into her. He keeps requesting her, gets very obsessed with her. And then it's the first day of classes, and happens to be she walks into her first class, and who do you know is her teacher? This guy that has been watching her at this sex club. So he recognizes her, but she doesn't recognize him. And then they're obviously going to end up having like, this forbidden age gap, everything along those lines sort of romance. And happens to be the reason that this guy is into the act of like voyeurism, or whatever you want to call it. I totally said that wrong, but you get what I mean, hopefully. But the reason why he's like that is because of something that happened in his past. And I don't really want to give away spoilers, so I'm going to just tell you to like look up trigger warnings. But definitely this girl really saved him, because how do I even say it without saying anything? So like, whatever, just take my word for it. This one was very much a book boy being saved by the girl in a very like, in not even like a sexual way, but like an emotional way, like everything along those lines. But he was obviously like this for a reason, and then she comes into his life and saves him. And the last book I'm going to share with you is Playing with Fire by L.J. Shen, which is another one of those like both of them were saved by each other, but I feel like you don't even often find when like the boy is saved at all. So I very much wanted to mention this book because like I feel like it very well fits into the vibe of all of the other books that I mentioned in this video. So in this book, you are following this girl who was in a fire a couple of years ago, and she's very scarred from it. Like she has fire burns all over her face, all over her body, and she basically like, she's kind of like shut off from everybody else since then. Like she used to be very popular, and then once she lost her beauty, she kind of just like, doesn't want to like, be near anybody anymore. And this guy who is like a very, very popular guy in her college ends ends up like walking up to the food truck that she works at and asks for a job. So he ends up getting it, and now they have to work together. And he is a fighter, like he's an underground fighter, and he's dealing with a lot of stuff as well. But like you don't think it right off the bat because like he's so popular and he's a fighter and he's really cool and has a ton of friends and everything like that. But then as you get later into the book, like they basically end up becoming like really good friends, and then obviously they're gonna end up falling for each other. And you just basically get to see like not only does like he bring her out of her shell, but like she basically fixes him as well in ways that you didn't like first think was gonna happen. And I just think it was a really adorable story of two strangers becoming friends, turning into lovers, and saving each other. So I highly recommend this one as well. I really did enjoy this book. And that is all the books that I'm going to share with you for this video. So let me know if you have any recs for me that I didn't mention in this video that you think fit into this trope, because I love reading books like this and I would love to hear some books that you really enjoyed that fit into this category. So leave a comment down below, and if you enjoyed watching this, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're not currently subscribed. And anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, enjoy reading.